Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 28 free hit, and I wanted to sort of debut my free hit template that I'd be suggesting for people to go for with a couple differentials later on in the video. The first point of contention when you look at the defenders this week is simply Kepa, James, and Chilwell. The first question mark I'm sure people will be asking is why go for triple Chelsea defense? First of all, I feel like Chelsea have the best chances of actually getting a clean sheet this week, even though this is a great fixture on paper to go for Arsenal assets. What I would say with Arsenal assets is they probably don't have the same amount of upside in terms of defenders versus other positions. So if you look at James and Chilwell, what's interesting between the two of them is James, you're only really borrowing him for 1 week, so the concerns about illness will probably be explained by Potter, so you'll probably know whether James will actually get a consistent start in this fixture. And with Chilwell, we don't really have that concern, and he's looked exceptional as of late. So he's definitely someone who's locked into this free hit template. Kepa is someone that you can absolutely drop. However, I feel like Kepa is someone that you probably might want to consider just because if you were going for the best team possible, I still think triple Chelsea defense probably is the best because there's actually more forward options than defender options, especially given that we're going to head towards a double Arsenal midfield template. Maybe you're comfortable with actually going for double Newcastle defense versus Nottingham Forest away, and that could actually allow you to go for someone like Pope, which would probably mean that Kai Havertz can join your team if you actually fancy him over some of the forwards that I will be suggesting in a second. However, Gabriel is someone that you probably want to have nailed just because, as I said, Arsenal probably have great chances of keeping a clean sheet here versus a Crystal Palace side that have found it extremely hard to get shots on target. So they have run into a serious bad run of form. I felt like they actually played quite competitively versus City, but City were able to block a lot of the shots that Crystal Palace got off, and they actually did sacrifice a lot of men, especially players like Ake and Stones, who were actually able to create a lot of defensive recoveries in that game that actually stopped Crystal Palace from actually being able to break through. So that's interesting there. But Trippier, once again, with the exceptional performance from the attacking point of view versus Wolves, you can see why there's value in Trippier. Yes, of course, he made a calamitous mistake versus Hwang, or versus Wolves rather, that allowed Hwang to score. But I still feel like Eddie Howe's not going to do anything about that. Trippier is so quintessential to this team from the offensive point of view that there's no reason to think about dropping Trippier from your team until we really see him get dropped in the future. I think he's part and parcel to this Newcastle team. If we head on now to the midfielders, the big gamble here is to go into someone like Heung-min Son. And what I would say with the free hit is this is your opportunity to go for assets that are differentials, but that you actually envision as having a high ceiling. Son is someone who, of course, has not found any form since the Leicester game, arguably until recently. And his slight uptick in form, particularly in finishing and showing a little bit more composure in the previous match, gives me a little bit of the sort of want to move into an asset like Son, particularly now that we know that Maddison is injured. Now, if Maddison isn't injured, I might actually revise this draft. Maybe we would actually go 3-4-3, go with Maddison here, include Son regardless. But for now, I think Son is a very interesting gamble to go for versus Southampton, even though they're away from home. It's just one of those things where with Son in form, with this Tottenham team fully focused on getting for top four, which is something that they're still competing for, I think they've got great chances of having Son finding some form towards the back half of the season, given that he's already started to score again. As far as Saka and Odegaard, the reason why we've gone for these two assets is because with Jesus coming back into the team, you're starting to see a picture where this Arsenal team will rotate a lot. What's interesting about Saka is he was rested, arguably, in the 80th or 75th minute for someone like Reece Nelson, who came in and actually occupied those minutes. But the key thing here is Arsenal were already with a 3-0 lead. It's not very often that Arsenal get towards a 3-0 lead without Saka being involved, and this was the case today. But more often than not, you'd probably expect that even if Saka was to be rested around 80 minutes, that he would have been involved. And the penalty charm is still there around Saka. I think he has been a little bit tired, if I'm being completely honest. And if he was going to play another 90 minutes versus Sporting, I would probably actually bench Saka and replace him with another Arsenal midfielder, particularly someone who might be rested for the Premier League match. But we have to sort of keep our eyes open towards that Sporting game and see what happens with the Arsenal players and the minutes that they're playing. Because at this moment in time, I feel like Saka is extremely tired, even though we saw close to what his peak form could have been around 2 to 3 weeks ago. As far as Odegaard, we saw him come back to his scoring ways, and he looked exceptional. Again, we saw him take a lot of shots versus Bournemouth, and now he's developed, once again, a great sort of composed finish versus Fulham, and I'm happy to put Odegaard in the team just because he's one of the most nailed assets. And unlike Martinelli, he isn't someone who's really going to share those minutes with Jesus, where if you look at Trossard and Jesus, both those options are capable of being rotated at the 65th minute, or arguably even not getting a start based on Jesus's fitness. If we head on now towards the forwards, just to round things out, I'm going for Tony, Watkins, and Kane. Now, Tony, Watkins, and Kane is completely predicated on Tony actually still continuing to be allowed to play football. Otherwise, of course, Tony is someone that you'd probably want to transfer out to Kai Havertz immediately on this sort of free hit template. And he would be the option there, which would probably mean you have to go for a Newcastle defender in this sort of draft formation. You could also move towards another midfield in this template if you're not really tempted by the ceiling of the Newcastle defense. And therefore, you could maybe move into something like an Aston Villa midfielder if you'd like to go for that, or as I said, Maddison or Barnes. That sort of Leicester asset that you think could be interesting versus Brentford, even though they're actually going away from home, which is tough. I feel like Maddison's probably the only gamble I'd take, but with the injury news, this is the draft that I'm going for. So this is based on some of the information that we have available, which could change, of course, as we progress with the week. With Watkins and Kane, these are two assets that have been extremely consistent. Kane for the entirety of the season, and Watkins more so with the new managerial change. Watkins has been quite consistent anyways when you look at his historic goal scoring chances, his ability to be clinical compared to his expected goals. And now that his expected goals have seen an uptick, we're also seeing an uptick naturally in his goals because he's not been a historically poor finisher compared to someone like Kai Havertz as an example during his stint at Chelsea. So that's why I feel like Watkins has a great upside. Tony as well. He simply has a great fixture versus Leicester, a team that simply have found it extremely hard to defend, particularly away from home. And I feel like anytime you get to play versus Leicester is a good chance for a talisman really of a team to do well. And that's historically what we've seen with an asset like Kane. Here he's versus Southampton. I think he's going to be a fantastic captaincy option, which is why I'm going to slam the captaincy on Kane. And then I'd probably be vice-captaining Saka. Now, if you thought about the fixtures and you thought about, let's say, the recent form of Saka, I can understand vice-capping someone like Odegaard instead, or even going for one of these Chelsea mid defenders to go for a little bit more of a sort of high-ceiling punt. I feel like maybe James could be that option, particularly if he was to get a penalty, as Potter suggested he could get them. But this is going to be my sort of draft template here if I was going for Game Week 28, and as things stand based on the information we have available. Now, we also have one additional option to actually look at some of the differentials, and I've suggested a few here. If you don't want to go for someone like Pope, you can go for Martinez as a keeper. Zinchenko, of course, is a very good sort of 50-50 option versus Gabriel. If you subscribe to the theory that Gabriel can't get another header, simply Zinchenko is someone who's actually very highly involved in plays. He, however, does seem to be limited on a minutes perspective sometimes, so that could also take him out of bonus points. It really just depends on whether he's heavily involved in the game. In the Fulham scenario, I would say that's probably one of his least involved games because a lot of the game was actually played on that sort of right-hand side, or at least more towards Trossard, who was playing on the far left position. And then Zinchenko was actually someone who's playing just that sort of classical midfield role, but not actually bombarding forwards towards good positions at the edge of the opponent's box. It was more so Trossard who was actually pushing on the flanks. Porro is an interesting option because it seems like Emerson is still not ready and fit to play. We'll see what happens there. He's actually shown some good stats from the underlying point of view where you're starting to see the reason why he was brought into this team as a right wing back under the Conte structure. I feel like he's an interesting gambit if you want to, let's say, sidestep the triple Chelsea defense and you feel like the Newcastle double defense is also a very low ceiling, so that's an option there too. Almiron is someone that I think would definitely get the start after salvaging Newcastle's win in the previous game versus Wolves, and simply put, Nottingham Forest is a good fixture, as we've seen time and time again this season. Now, of course, it's an away game, so you might want to think about that too, but I feel like this is a great fixture to go for Almiron if you wanted to go for a 3-4-3 structure and probably keep players like Son and Saka and Odegaard, but go for, let's say, a fourth option. And Martinelli, of course, just another replacement for one of the Arsenal assets, depending on what happens in the Sporting game. And of course, if you believe if he has more form, Trossard, of course, is another great option too. As far as the forward options, Mbeumo is interesting if, let's say, Tony actually gets suspended, because we know that he would be the focal point of the team alongside Wissa. However, Havertz is probably the option that I would go towards if Tony was suspended, as he seems to be the option that is preferred, as he will be on penalties, similar to Mbeumo in the scenario that Tony is out, but at the same time playing for a team like Chelsea, who are consistently finding a lot more chances under this three at the back structure. So Havertz has been someone who has been benefiting really from the structural change, because he is almost the lone forward option, and chances are being developed for him. Even though he's not exactly the most clinical finisher, we're seeing less chances being built for options like Felix, and therefore Havertz becomes the primary option. So these are the differentials. I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you guys in the next video.